So Deuteronomy 16:18 through 20. Again, Deuteronomy is the fifth book. Deuteros is the Greek word for second. Nomos, the Greek word for law. In a sense, Deuteronomy is so named as the second law. It is the place where, if you want to look for a summary of Old Testament law, Deuteronomy is the book that you would most naturally go to. It starts with a little history about how Israel gets to the land. It has a review of the Ten Commandments and various other laws, blessings, cursings. In fact, the book of Deuteronomy kind of takes the form of an ancient treaty formulation. Little Bible nerd fact there. So let's talk about Deuteronomy chapter 16, verses 18 through 20. It is actually verse 20 that catches my attention first. You know, you're reading along and all of a sudden something stands out to you. It's verse 20 that stands out to me, where the writer says, justice and only justice, right? And that's across translations there. It's very often justice, only justice, or righteousness, only righteousness. It's this kind of emphatic turn. And so, you know, it makes you sit up and take notice. And what's going on here? What's happening in verses 18 through 20? Well, these are three little verses that deal with some basic judiciary rules. In other words, you've got these judges. Some of them might be similar to folks that we see in the book of Judges. Many of them are not. They are kind of assistant judges to the supreme leader of Israel, who at the time of the book of Deuteronomy is Moses, Joshua after him. So how do these helper judges, if you will, how are they supposed to act? What are they supposed to focus on? And in these three verses, we have a basic kind of oath, if you will, of how these judges are supposed to act. The number one thing, in my view, if I were going to sum it up, right, for how these judiciary persons or personages should behave, it is in this way: do not distort justice. That's essentially what the writer's saying. Don't distort justice. How do you distort justice? Bribes distort justice. That's the thing that the text focuses on. Now, what do bribes constitute? Bribes constitute money paid to someone else to give you the justice that you wouldn't otherwise get. Or it could be a way of saying, well, I think I have a pretty good case, but I'll just crease the odds here and I'll give a bribe. An extra payment, so I get somebody in my favor. Now, this can be applied to a judiciary context, but it can be applied to a number of other contexts, and certainly as it relates to issues front and center for us in our world today, as it relates to issues of healthcare. I don't want to reduce, nor do I want to equate premiums that we pay for our health insurance to bribes, but there is this sense that I need to be asking myself, I get the health care I can afford, right? And is that right? Right? Am I more deserving of health care because I'm employed? Am I more deserving of health care because I have a certain income? And so I think about health care as a justice issue. Not everybody does. And certainly there are fiscal issues about which United States citizens and residents have to be thinking about. I understand all of that. But it makes me wonder, right? What we're doing here. Other countries around the world have different systems. Maybe there's something more equitable, and that's the thing that I'm most concerned with, is what's equitable for all of our residents and citizens. Okay, so in any event, and forgive me if I've gone too far, I don't mean to bring any offense to anyone. It's just these are the kinds of questions that I ask myself. Bribery is that which distorts justice. What does the text say? It says that bribery blinds the eyes of the wise. How does it do that? Well, the imagery is that the wise, obviously, they're supposed to be the judges, or the judges are supposed to be wise, and what they need to do is they need to see, they need to investigate, they need to understand the case, right? But a bribe causes the vision to be blurred. And now all I see is this bribe that I've gotten and the person that gave me the bribe. That is the person that I need to, they gave me a bribe for a reason, right? They gave me the bribe so that I would do something for them. And so that's one thing that happens to me. The second thing that happens in the text is that it subverts, or it renders ineffective the cause of those who are in the right. Right? So the idea is that maybe the poor are actually right here, but they don't get the justice that their case demands because that bribe has short-circuited that process, the due process of law. Right? So there are two ill effects of the bribe. One is on the judge, because now that person is blinded to what is right. And two is the person that's actually in the right, because justice, that is the pleading or the advocacy that they are supposed to get, they don't get. The only one that benefits from the bribe is the one that gives the bribe. And that's why the writer then kind of ends up this section by saying justice, only justice. That is the benefit of the rule of law, and that benefit guarantees long life in the land. Now, certainly for Israel, this idea of having long life in the land goes back to Abraham and the promise of land that is made to Abraham in Genesis chapter 12, verses 1 to 3. But I think maybe there are some implications for us. What happens to a society, what happens to a country when there is no more justice? Now, I'm not saying there's not justice in the U.S. I'm not saying that at all. I'm just saying, but what happens when justice is subverted? What can people depend on? And I think the writer is saying, not much. There's a lot that gets compromised when there's no more justice, or when justice is only the justice you can pay for. And who can't pay for it? The poor can't pay for it. Now, one of the things that we'll deal with, especially like 2 lectures from now, talking about Amos, is the idea that the poor in Amos especially, but other places as well, the poor are the righteous poor. Now, that's not to say that they're righteous in terms of this kind of Christian idea of righteousness and right relationship with God, but that the poor of the land very often are those for whom God advocates because they don't have anybody else to advocate for them. Maybe not no one else, but few are the people. And God listens to the poor. There's a lesson in there for us. I will let you make that application to your own life, your own practice, your own faith. But when we read let me interrupt myself for a second and say this is one of the reasons why I get frustrated when we say, well, the Old Testament is all about blood, death, doom, war, all of that, because these cries for justice, they're all over the place in the Old Testament. And if we think that the Old Testament is only death and war and destruction, then we miss this cry of advocacy that is throughout the pages of the Old Testament. If we miss that, we've missed the message of the Old Testament. If we miss the message of the Old Testament, we miss the benefit of these texts. So obviously, I'm on my high horse a little bit. I'll stop now. We'll come back and talk about some Isaiah passages in the next video. Justice, only justice.